permission to freely.
Yes.
Dr. Molina, I believe what we left off with was talking about State's Exhibit. State's Exhibits 112 through 113. I'm going to show you what's already admitted. The State's Exhibit 113. In your opinion, was this consistent with like salsa?
Yes, again, that's a photograph of the stomach contents, and that would be consistent.
Okay. So, yeah, is your mic on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
So the next thing I want to talk about is not necessarily one of the findings as it relates to the ultimate findings in your autopsy report, but some other evidence as it relates to potentially that was gathered during the autopsy and death investigation. What is macrocytic anemia?
So anemia is when we don't have as many red blood cells as we should. Red blood cells carry the oxygen to the tissues for us. And there are multiple reasons that we could be anemic. Macrocytic anemia means that the red blood cells are larger than they should be. And so if we have a low count and they're too large, it's consistent with a vitamin deficiency.
Okay. And macrocytic anemia, does it have any relation as to informing your opinion as to whether Benji died from starvation?
Well, it's certainly kind of an added detail, right? It doesn't have to be there as part of starvation, but when we see it, it's again consistent with vitamin deficiencies. Vitamin deficiencies commonly happen with starvation and malnourishment.
So, in reviewing the medical records in this case, were you able to determine see if we can do this between the beats. In reviewing the medical records, were you able to determine if Benji had or what you believe to be macrocytic anemia in any of the medical records?
Yes.
And in which dates?
So I believe in the July, I believe it's the 21st, but again, I'm going right, but in the July 2021 visit, he had a low hemoglobin, still normal but low, but evidence of macrocytosis, meaning already showing that those red blood cells were too big. And then at the time of death, with treatment, he was now anemic, meaning his blood count was too low, and he again had that macrocytosis. His red blood cells were too big.
And what values are you looking at in order to make that determination?
So for anemia, we look at hemoglobin and hematocrit. And for macrocytosis, we look at something called MCV. That's what's on the laboratory report. It means mean corpuscular volume. It's how big the red blood cell is.
And I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit number 102. And it's already marked as 7/21/21, date of that record. Can you look to verify that macrocytic anemia was present on 7/21/21?
Sorry, I'm not seeing the hemoglobin and hematocrit. This is from 722, this laboratory value. And it shows a mean corpuscular volume of 93.8, which is high normal, I believe, but it's not, it's not marked as being out of range for this hospital. So I'd have to look, each hospital has their own ranges for normal, and usually they mark when they're out of range.
Okay, and maybe I can look at the medical records in a second to see if I have it marked. But as it relates to the 817, the terminal records, as you've been referring to them, that the acidic anemia was present then, correct?
Yes, as I recall.
What is the thymus?
The thymus is an organ that lives in the anterior mediastinum, right underneath the sternum of the chest. And we have it when we're young. Its purpose, it plays a role in the immune system. So it helps to kind of train, if you will, some of our immune cells. And then as we age, it gradually goes away.
And, during your autopsy, did you observe Benji's thymus?
No, we were unable to find the thymus at autopsy.
And you said it develops as you get older?
Well, it's there when you're young, so it's one organ that's larger when you're an infant, and then gradually involutes or goes away as you get older. So most adults don't have thymuses.
And so, is there any indication to you, or is there anything telling as it relates to Benji not having a thymus at that point in his life?
Well, at his age, he should have had a thymus. It should have been identifiable. We know from research that it should have been around maybe 35 grams, so certainly identifiable. So the fact we couldn't find it would mean that it's already involuted, it's already gone away. And usually that happens in children under stress. So if there's an extreme illness or some other kind of stress related to the body, then the thymus will involute or atrophy, meaning get smaller.
And are there potential causes for that, getting smaller?
Again, it's when the body is under extreme stress. So in this particular case, starvation would be considered extreme stress. So it could be related to that.
So the absence of his thymus would be consistent with your ultimate opinion that Benji died from starvation?
Yes.
What is an IO, or interosseous line?
So we're probably all most familiar with an IV or an intravascular line, where hospitals or medical professionals might put a small catheter into a vessel where they can give medications or fluids, right? An IO is very similar to that, except that the needle is placed into your bone, and the fluids or medications can be placed into the center part of the bone is called the bone marrow. It's softer, and you can put fluids or medications into the bone. Those are usually used in very specific circumstances, trauma, what we call codes when people require resuscitation, and it's very difficult to get into their vessels, and an IO is faster.
As it relates to placing the line, and then, I should say this, so part of it is used to put fluids into the body.
Correct.
And then can also fluids be drawn from an IO?
Well, blood samples can be drawn from an IO just like you're drawn from, say, an intravascular line.
And as it relates to the literature, are values from an IO as well as, you said, a peripheral stick, do those correlate?
So, again, these IOs are placed during medical treatment, and if that's the only line and they're being used to test for, the same blood tests you would have, then yes, the literature has done studies that look at IO results versus blood results, and they correlate well. Otherwise, they wouldn't be used because physicians are basically running these tests to make decisions, treatment decisions. And so if the values aren't consistent, then they're not helpful in making those treatment decisions. So again, the literature has shown that values obtained from an IO and those obtained from a blood stick are consistent.
And as it relates to Benji, are you aware whether he had an IO in place at the time of his death?
Yes.
I'm going to go back to the macrocytic anemia very briefly. I'm going to show you, again, states exhibit 102. Do those appear to be the lab results from 7/21 of 21?
Yes.
Okay. Is this what you were looking for earlier?
Yes.
Okay. So in looking at these lab results, does this inform you as to whether you believe Benji was suffering from macrocytic anemia on 7/21 of 21?
Yes.
And what in particular?
Again, so we look at the hemoglobin and hematocrit, and while they are within normal range, they're very low. So the low limit of normal for hemoglobin being 11.5, and it's 11.7, so just kind of right there. But more telling is the MCV, the mean corpuscular volume, the size of that red blood cell, is 93.8, which is high. The upper limit for this laboratory being, so I have to draw 87. I'm sorry, 87. So that tells us those red blood cells are too big. So we're already at that macrocytosis, and the hemoglobin's already dropping. So we're very close to that macrocytic anemia.
Okay. Which again indicates a vitamin deficiency?
Yes.
Sure. Dr. Molina, did you take photographs during the physical examination part of the autopsy on August 18th of 2021?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as State Exhibit 121 through 215. In looking at those and previously talking this morning, does this appear to be the full set of autopsy photos?
Yes, it does appear to be a full set of autopsy photos.
And do these photos truly accurately represent Benji at the time of his autopsy on August 18th of 2021?
Yes.
Your Honor, the time the state moved from 121 through 215, there were full autopsy photographs and his previously itinerary discovery.
Your Honor, may I take this witness just on a brief order?
Sure.
Dr. Molina, you said these are all of the photos from the autopsy, correct?
I believe they are. If you want me to match them, I can.
No, I'm just saying, like, so this is just going to take any other photos than what's in here.
Aside from the other photos that were taken after the autopsy, such as the gastric contents. And then there were other photos. So those photos were taken at the time of the autopsy. Additional photos were taken at the request of counsel after the autopsy had been completed, including the gastric contents and some, I believe, you requested of tissues.
Right, and those additional photos that were requested by counsel were taken in 2024?
I don't remember the exact dates, but yes, they weren't taken at the time of the autopsy.
And Benjamin's, they weren't of Benjamin's body, they were of evidence that y'all were maintaining at the MD's office, correct?
Specimens that we were maintaining, but yes.
Okay. And so, just to be clear though, there are no photos that exist of the insides of Benji's organs or anything like that that you took at the time?
Correct.
No objection as to states
121 through 215.
121 through 215.
States Exhibit 121 through 215 inclusive are admitted. They may be published.
So, the first photo I'm going to show you is State's Exhibit 121. Is that Benji on the date of your autopsy?
Technically, that is a photograph on August 17th when the body was, it's what we call the intake photo. So it's when the body arrived to the office. We always take a photograph, and the body actually came in the 17th and the autopsy was performed on the 18th.
Okay, so this is the intake photo from the 17th as his body came to the MD's office.
Correct.
So, as it relates to his physical appearance, anything telling to you as it relates to your ultimate opinion as to whether Benji suffered from starvation at the time of his death?
From this photograph, you can see that he appears to be underweight and small for age.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 126. There's some like purplish hue right here on what appears to be his buttocks. Are you familiar with Mongolian spots?
Yes.
Does this appear to be Mongolian spots to you?
The purplish hue does. In this photograph, there's also some contusions noted as well. But yes, the purplish hue is.
Like right here, and then generally right here.
For the Mongolian spot?
Yes.
Yes.
And then contusions would be these spots kind of right here, correct?
Yes.
And this is a better picture of that should shown, which is State's Exhibit 127. See if I turn off the light, if it will. In that, again, the Mongolian spots are here. This one,
Yes.
okay,
Yes to that one. The other one's a little higher.
okay. Is it okay if she comes out from the same bench?
Yes.
And if you could just point for the jury, the difference between where the Mongolian spots would be and where the contusions would be.
So there's a Mongolian spot right here. And there's a Mongolian spot, this kind of whole area here, which is kind of purple. And then we see these kind of separate, darker, maybe red areas. Those are contusions.
Okay, thank you. I want to show you what is admitted as State's Exhibit 136. I'm going to cover Benji's genitalia with just a sticky note. As it relates to this photograph, is there anything in this that is telling as it relates to Benji's size and her weight, and for your opinions relating to starvation?
So again, in this photograph, we can see that he's underweight. We see a prominence of the ribs. We see that the abdomen is somewhat scaphoid, goes down, it's not flat.
I'm going to show you what's been admitted in State's Exhibit 147. This point right here on State's Exhibit number 147, is that where the IO line would have been placed?
That is certainly an IO mark, and yes, that is where the IO was.
I'll show you State's Exhibit 149. Is that Benji?
Yes.
And again, can you see his ribs in this picture?
Yes.
What does that indicate to you?
Again, this is just showing that he's underweight. There's a prominence of the ribs and the abdomen again goes down instead of lying flat.
Going back to State's 147, we're talking about the IO line. Again, that can be used to place fluids within the body.
To place fluids into the body?
Yes.
Yes.
And when the IO is placed and saline is put into the body, can that affect the ultimate weight?
Yes.
How so?
Well, again, you're putting fluids into the body, and the fluids, especially during times of resuscitation, the fluids have nowhere to go. So any fluid you put into the body will stay in the body, increasing the weight by how much fluid you've put into the body.
So your measurement of Benji's weight at 12.9,
12.7.
12.7 kilos at the time of his death potentially could have been inflated by the fact that he was receiving fluids prior to the time of his death?
Potentially, yes.
I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit 111. Again, is what I'm pointing to in this photograph, is that the IO line?
Yes.
And this area that's around it that appears like wetness. I think generally speaking, we'll look at defense exhibit, also number 8. Is it possible that this, based on your understanding of how these codes work, how people are brought in with IOs, and the emergency medical treatment they might receive, that whether this is saline or whether this is urine?
It could be either. I couldn't say.
Okay. So the fact that there's wetness on this bed, you cannot say that that is urine.
Not definitively, no.
Okay. And in looking at State's Exhibit number 111, does the diaper appear to be cut to you?
Yes.
And on which side of his body?
Left.
Okay. So this side of the body is where it's cut.
Correct.
So you can see the area of wetness kind of extending down here in State's Exhibit 11 and State's Exhibit number 10, the wetness over here. The wetness that's over here, is that on the same side as the IO line?
Yes.
And with the diaper being cut this way, would you expect it, if it was urine, to go in that direction?
Objection, Your Honor, this is speculation at this time.
I'm going to let her answer, considering her expertise. Go ahead.
So in order for that to be urine, again, it's likely not coming from the diaper because the diaper is absorbent. So it would come from basically urination occurring after the diaper's cut, which would then travel kind of by least resistance, which would be most likely to the left since the right side of the diaper is more intact. So yes, I would expect it to be more on the left side than the right.
Okay. But on this photo, you can see that the wetness is present on the right side of his body.
Correct.
I want to go talking about the weights just for a second again. I know it was late yesterday. I know my brain wasn't working like it should. When we were talking about State's Exhibit 111, and I apologize for yesterday for making you do math on the spot. So again, looking at this, the highest weight that he was 48 months, is that correct?
Correct.
And as it relates to if he would have continued on this 45% growth rate, again, what would his weight been at the time of his death in kilograms at 58 months?
Approximately 16.5 and change.
Okay. And how much did he weigh at the time of his death?
12.7.
Okay, and that is a difference roughly of... I'm doing it again.
I'm gonna do 3.8.
Okay. And let's just round it to 4 for ease purposes.
Thank you.
4 every pound is how many pounds per kilogram?
1 pound is 2.2 kilos. 2.2 pounds is 1 kilo, sorry.
Okay. So 2.2 times 4 is 8.8.
Correct.
Okay. So there would have been a difference of 8.8 pounds if he would have stayed on the curve compared to what his actual weight was at the time of death.
Correct.
And 8.8 is approximately what 8.8 pounds, let's roughly say 9, is what percentage of 28 pounds, which is roughly his weight at the time of death.
It's roughly a third, so 30%.
So, again, that third represents the difference in the weight had he stayed on the curve.
Correct.
As looking at in your death investigation, were you able to review photographs of Benji?
Yes.
I'm going to go to State's Exhibit 76, which has already been admitted, which is photographed. I'm going to show you picture number 3 on State's Exhibit number 76, which states a capture time of 4/4/21. Around April of 2021, do you have a weight for Benji at that point?
The closest weight I have would be March 25th
Of 2021?
of 2021.
And how much did he weigh then?
14.6.
Which is the second highest weight you had for Benji as a review of your medical records, correct?
Correct.
And so, on April 1st, or around there, was Benji growing at that point?
No.
Okay, so his body would have already been in the decline?
Correct, from the trend.
Okay. So looking at that photo, compared to photograph number 30 on State's Exhibit number 76, which indicates a capture time of, or capture date of August 14th of 2021. Cooperate. Are you able to see a difference in Benji's appearance?
By my eye, yes, mainly evidenced in the face, since you can't see much of the body in the right photo.
Does it appear to you that his face is the same shape or size?
About the same size, just less tissue.
Okay. Now I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit 94, which has already been testified to. It was taken on July 20th of 2021. In this photograph, can you see any signs in this photograph that Benji may be suffering from malnutrition?
You can certainly tell from this photograph he appears to be underweight. You can see the ribs from the back as well as the scapular margins, the shoulder bone. You can see that outlined on both sides as well.
Okay. And is there a weight for Benji around the time that this photograph was taken?
I apologize, what did you say the date was?
This was taken on 7/20 of 21?
So from, I believe there's 2 weights from 7/21. One is, I believe, 14.6, and the other, I believe, was 13.8.
And the 13.8, where was that taken?
I believe that was from the Children's Hospital of San Antonio, I believe. Could be mistaken.
Okay. And the 14.6, that was from where?
The Pearl Emergency Room.
Prior to that, him receiving treatment at the Pearl ER, was there a weight that you were able to go through the records and see that he weighed prior to that?
Prior to July 21st?
Yes.
So the one I have prior to that is March 25th, which is 14.6.
Okay. And then what's the next time that he was weighed from the medical records after July 21st of 2021?
July 26th of 2021 was 13.84.
Okay. So the 21st, Joseph says he's 13.8, and then on the 26th, what facility was he there?
Luis Lopez, the little buddy's pediatrician,
Okay, and how much did he weigh there again?
13.84.
So roughly the same weight?
Correct.
So, for argument's sake, 13.8 roughly here based on one of the medical records. And at around this time he was 14.6 kilos based on the medical records and when this photograph says it was taken, roughly.
Correct.
In your autopsy report, you indicated that there was cerebral edema, correct?
Correct.
And what is cerebral edema?
That's swelling of the brain.
And would you have expected to find that during Benji's autopsy?
Yes.
Why is that?
Cerebral edema is a very common finding at autopsy when someone's undergone resuscitation. Cerebral edema is a result of the brain not receiving enough oxygen, which is an injury, and it will swell. So it's a very common finding that we see. Cerebral edema can also be found in multiple other causes of death, such as heart attacks, drug overdoses, starvation. So it's a common finding on autopsy.
So was the cerebral edema a cause of his death?
No.
It's a result of his death.
Correct.
Can cerebral edema be a cause of death?
In a very, very specific situation, there is something called malignant cerebral edema that can be a cause of death, but it's very specific and it requires a certain set of circumstances in order for that to be diagnosed.
You also indicated in your report that there was a lack of herniation, is that correct? Or something to that effect?
Yes.
What does that mean?
So, in order for cerebral edema to be a cause of death, the brain needs to herniate. What that means is the brain is enclosed in the skull. It has no room to grow So if your brain swells, easiest way to think of this is if you fall and twist your ankle and your ankle swells, right? You can see the swelling because your ankle grows. Same thing happens to the brain, but it's enclosed in the skull. So it has nowhere to go. And so when that happens, it starts to push down through what we call the foramen magnum. That's the hole at the bottom of the skull where the brain connects to the spinal cord. The brain will start to push down. It's the only way out, if you will, only direction to swell. We call that herniation. And when that happens, the brain, the nerves of the brain can start to compress, and that can cause death. And that is how cerebral edema can potentially cause death in that very specific circumstance. But there's no evidence of that in this case.
So again, you did not observe any herniation of the brain.
Correct.
So that would not have been a cause of his death.
Correct.
This might sound like a silly question, but as a medical professional, can you just look at a child you've never met the child before and say, they're suffering from starvation?
No.
Why is that?
Starvation, unfortunately, is very difficult to diagnose at a point in time. Clinically, it's usually diagnosed because you have a child who's not gaining weight, and so you put them in the hospital, you feed them, they gain weight. And so again, it's that trend. You have to know that they're not gaining weight, then you have to know that they can gain weight. So starvation, again, we require multiple data points, if you will, in order to diagnose it. You can't just have one thing and say, oh, this is what it is.
Is it also potentially affected by whether a medical professional has seen that child more than once?
Yes.
How so?
Again, if you have, say, a treating physician who's maybe the regular pediatrician who's routinely seeing a child, then again, they might be able to see that weight loss. And if they're charting it or they're looking at the child saying, oh, this child's falling off the curve. They have multiple data points to look at versus just looking at one snapshot in time.
In your review of the medical records, does it appear to you that Benji saw the same provider within the last 10 months of his life more than once?
It appears he saw one provider twice and went to the same facility at least twice, but I don't know if he saw the same provider.
Okay, what provider did he see more than once?
Luis Lopez.
Okay. And what days did he see him?
December 9th of 2020 and July 26th of 2021.
What was the first date he said?
December 9th of 2020 at age approximately 50 months, and then again at 57 months.
And then the facility that he went to more than once?
The Children's Hospital of San Antonio, I believe both of those are emergency room visits.
Okay, but you're not aware, based on your memory, that if that was the same provider or not?
Correct.
Okay. During the emergency medical treatment at the time of his death, was there some treatment that Benji had in order to, for lack of a better term, deflate his belly?
Yes.
And what is that?
They placed the nasogastric tube, the tube I believe we discussed yesterday, they put in through your nose and into your stomach to let I believe it was specifically mentioned to there was abdominal distension noted, and so they placed that.
Are you familiar with the definition in the Texas law as it relates to serious bodily injury?
Yes.
Is it your opinion that at the time of his death, Benjamin suffered serious bodily injury?
Yes.
The substantial weight loss prior to him ultimately dying, would you also consider that serious bodily injury?
Yes.
Would Benjamin receiving adequate nutrition potentially prevented his death?
Potentially, yes.
Would Benji receiving adequate nutrition potentially prevented his weight loss?
Potentially, yes.
Would Benji seeking medical care prevented his ultimate death?
Potentially, yes.
Ultimately, what is your opinion as it relates to Benji's cause of death
That he died from starvation.
and the manner of his death?
Homicide.
I'll pass it, Ms. Judge.
Is everybody good? Can we move to the forward? Okay. I'm sorry.
Dr. Molina, you would agree that a lot of the terms that you use, most lay people like myself, we don't use those terms, correct?
Some of the terms, yes. I try to define them when I can, yes.
Okay, and so in order to help the jury understand cause and manner of death, would it be helpful, can I make you a demonstrative of what we're talking about as we talk about it, to put the name that we're saying, the word we're saying, so that we can define it at that time, and then they will have it as to what you're telling them it means. Is that fair?
Sure.
Judge, come here, Judge.
So first, just backing up, I would like, you said there's a difference between the cause of death and the manner of death, correct?
Correct.
All right. And so I'm just going to write cause and then manner. Is that too long? Okay. So when we're looking at these, would you agree they're two distinct things?
Correct.
And when you're talking about the cause of death, would you agree that that's going to be it comes up largely from your autopsy, scientific evidence, and it's more objective?
Correct. I mean, they're both objective terms, but yes, cause from the autopsy and science. Correct.
Okay. So this is going to be more of your expertise is the cause, correct? I mean, that's what you train on. Not that you can't come up with manner, I'm not saying that, but the cause is what, why we have medical examiners come in and look at the body, correct?
So medical examiners are actually trained in both cause and manner of death because we're trained in death investigation. I believe maybe what you're getting at is that cause comes mostly from medical school, whereas the training in manner comes more from our fellowship. So cause is based more meaning on medicine.
Okay. Medicine. And then versus the manner, and yesterday you said there was 5 things, and only 5 things that can be a manner.
Correct.
Okay, and what were those?
So it can be natural,
Okay,
accident, suicide, homicide, undetermined.
Okay, now, when you're looking at the manner of death, does it take into account much more of what lay people might see? For instance, like the evidence in the case, as opposed to the autopsy in medicine.
So, when determining manner, first again, manner is an epidemiologic term defined on the death certificate by these 5 choices, right? So manner takes into consideration the circumstances of how the death occurred. And so the autopsy plays a role in determining manner, but so do the circumstances. So if I may, for example, a contact gunshot wound to the head would be consistent with a suicide. So if the circumstances suggest that their person is alone with the firearm, there's a note of intent, and there's a contact gunshot wound to the head, that would all be consistent with suicide. However, if the circumstances suggest that perhaps another person took a firearm and placed it in contact with someone's head, and maybe there's a witness who saw this and pulled the trigger, that same contact gunshot wound could be a homicide. It depends on the circumstances of how the wound was sustained. The way that they can interact is, let's say a person is found alone in a room and there's no firearm present, and it's not a contact gunshot wound, it's a distant gunshot wound. It's much more difficult for that autopsy to be a suicide, because it would be hard for that person to shoot themselves in such a manner. So that's how they play together. The autopsy findings can certainly help us with manner, but so do the circumstances in the investigation.
So would it be fair to say, like, kind of how we define this, to right circumstances, because that's really what you're considering in manner, correct? In addition to the autopsy, you're taking the cause, and now you're considering circumstances.
Correct.
Is that fair? Okay, and then, so in this case, you found the cause was starvation.
Correct.
Okay. And you found that the manner was homicide.
Correct.
All right. Now, you would agree with me, though, that as a medical professional, or as any kind of professional, that at the end of this, your conclusion is your opinion, right? It's what you observed and the conclusion you came to.
Correct.
And so it's important to, would you agree to make sure that we document our work so that other people can evaluate it and confirm our findings, or maybe point out things that we may not have considered, correct?
It's important to document our work, yes, but it's to document our findings.
And why is it important to document your findings?
Aside from the fact that it's the law under the occupational code, every physician must create a report to document their findings when they see a patient. It's important to transmit that information to others. For instance, if you see your physician and then you go see another physician, the second physician will look at the first physician's notes to see maybe what tests have already been done, so that they either don't repeat tests or can move on with their evaluation.
Now, you testified under oath 2 weeks ago. Do you recall that?
At the hearing, yes.
Yes. And do you remember me providing you with a copy of the documents that your office provided my office when we requested a copy of your file?
Yes, I believe you showed me a copy of our file.
Yes. And at this time, I'm showing you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 33. Can you confirm that this is
So sorry.
the copy of your file that you provided to our office, minus the photos,
And slides and
slides? This is the
extras.
paper copy.
Okay. So, as I believe we discussed at the hearing, this appears to be a copy of our file, with the exception of an open records request that appears to have come in after this was created. It also contains our entire toxicology file information, which I did not bring that file today, so I can't match that.
So you don't know if that's your entire toxicology file?
All of the data that should be here is here in the toxicology file.
Okay, thank you. And so I apologize, I meant to make a correction. I misspelled. I'm sorry. Yeah, that. And then, so, at this time, I'm asking defendant's exhibit 33 to be admitted.
Defendant's 33 is admitted, it may be published.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you, so in defendant's exhibit 33, you also have your autopsy report, correct?
Correct.
And in there, your statement is that you found that it was most likely starvation, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so your terms for cause are most likely starvation. But would you agree with me that starvation is a process of exclusion when you come to that conclusion?
It's eliminating all other reasons for the malnutrition paired with investigation. So there's some inclusionary and some exclusionary.
Right, but I mean, you have to exclude other things, as you have to take into consideration other theories that might have happened and rule those out, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and in doing that, can you find in your toxicology report the ketones that were tested?
Do you want the data?
Yes. Can you just want to? Okay. Now, so out of the ketones, was acetone tested?
Yes.
Okay. Where is that?
So you have to know what's on our panel. And so what you're looking at here is a gas chromatograph. And what you're looking at in a gas chromatograph is that there are peaks where the different drugs or chemicals will show up. And the absence of peaks means there are...
Attention. An emergency has been reported. All occupants walk to the nearest stairway exit.
It's been confirmed that this is a test for the deputies, so as best as you can, if you could please.
Do not use the elevator. Walk to the nearest stairway.
Okay.
So
So let me ask this question. In your testing alcohols, acetone is tested under alcohol testing, correct?
alcohols and volatiles, which includes acetone and volatile chemicals, methanol, isopropanol.
And so in your in Defendant's Exhibit 33, which has the toxicology, you tested, or you can see that it tests for propanol, correct?
Well, in propanol is our internal standard. So the peak you're seeing is a chemical we added to make sure the test is working. Because if you saw absolutely no peaks, you might go, well, did it work or not? So we add a chemical at a specific concentration to make sure the test is working. So in propanol is what we added to this assay.
Okay, but when you're looking at the assay, and meaning the test, it just says ethanol, correct?
So what this is showing run times, and we're looking for peaks, right? And it's not showing any peaks. In this particular one you're looking at, there's a teeny tiny little blip that the computer picked up where ethanol might be, but it's actually not real. And we know that because we look at these run times, areas, and heights. So again, we have chemists who are trained to do these tests. You have to look at where the peak is, the size of the peak, right? Where it comes out to determine if it's really the specific drug. So in this particular case, there really aren't any peaks here. So that's why on the testing it says none detected. There's no other peaks detected on here of significance other than the one we created.
Okay, so let me ask it this way. When you test for alcohol, give me the items that you're testing for in alcohol.
I would have to look at our list, but the main one, I mean, there are literally hundreds of different drugs on our drug screens. I can't name them all for you. On our alcohol screen, the main drugs that we look for on that screen are ethanol, which is drinking alcohol, methanol, isopropanol, acetone. We look for volatiles, so those are your butanes, your fluorocarbons. There's many different drugs that we look for on each of these screens.
Okay, but acetone is one of those, correct?
Correct.
Now, going to your growth chart, I want to, it's right here.
I think we grabbed this on the...
I have mine. I don't have it.
Did
Is it okay?
you wrote a chart?
That's my copy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Charts and graphs. Okay, here it is.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the data. When you say you did your chart on, it's in State's Exhibit 10, correct?
It looks like
110.
110, yes.
110. And in it, your data points, you noted that you got verbal stuff from CHOSA, like for your data. Would you see that where it says CHOSA 1/5/18, verbal from Dr. Callahan?
Callahan, yes.
Okay. It's from CHOSA. I'll just say it's from CHOSA. Okay, so you called in and got this data, correct?
So actually what happened was we got the records from CHOSA. We requested all of the records. And when I looked at each of the records for each of those data points, I noticed that the height and weight information was missing from all of our files, which told me that perhaps we requested the wrong document. We usually request a physician progress notes. Dr. Callahan is an emergency room physician with CHOSA, and I know her. So I called her and I said, we obviously requested the wrong information because I have the information of the visit. I know why the child's there, but I'm missing what we call the vital signs, right? The heart rate, the blood pressure. Where is that data so that we request the right thing from CHOSA, right? And she was kind enough to actually give me the data points I was requesting for each visit because she could see it on her computer screen, so I didn't have to go through another records request.
When did you call her and get those weights?
I couldn't tell you the exact date, but I could tell you that it was sometime between likely between December 13th when we received the CHOSA records and January 6th when we requested more CHOSA records but actually knew what to request.
Okay. And so, so this isn't at the time of autopsy, correct?
Correct.
But you were able to call CHOSA and over the phone get those weights.
Correct.
And so you testified earlier that he had only seen the provider CHOSA twice in that year, or in that, I think the state used the term 10 months, right?
If it was 10 months, correct.
But in fact, CHOSA throughout his lifetime has seen the child by your logging is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then on the date of his death, which would have been 8. So, but 7 times prior to his death, he saw CHOSA, correct?
During his lifetime.
And so any doctor working at CHOSA is going to have access to his history, correct?
They should, yes.
And on 7/21/2021, which is right here, correct?
Yes.
That would have been 50, he would have been 56 months and 3 quarters. 56.
Correct.
Now, on the 7/21/2021 visit, this is a full workup. We have labs that day, and not just that the Children's Hospital of San Antonio doctors look at him, but we also, would you agree, have the Center for Miracles doctors, at least they're consulted on all the data that the doctors from CHOSA are receiving, correct?
That is my understanding. I actually don't have those records.
You don't have the 7/20?
No, the Center for Miracles. You're asking about the Center for Miracles consult.
Oh, okay. But they're referenced in the CHOSA records that the jury has, correct? Because
I believe so. I can't memorize what's in all these records.
Fair. But if they go look at 7/21/2021, it's noting that they are conferring with multiple doctors about this case.
Again, I'd have to reference the records. I apologize.
And not only are they conferring with multiple doctors, but this is not your typical ER visit, is it? I mean, they didn't just walk in and say, hey, I've got a sore throat. They went there specifically to have a workup done at the request of Child Protective Services.
So it appears that, I don't know if he was sent there at the request of Child Protective Service. Oh, no, I apologize. CPS sent him. It appears he's there for non-specific bruising of his body and self-harm behaviors.
And also in there, the doctors note that they are have been informed of possible malnutrition.
It says, I'm not sure about concerns for malnutrition. It says previously struggled to gain weight, requires nutritional shakes to gain weight appropriately, greatly increased appetite. I don't see any concerns for malnutrition,
Okay.
sorry.
Well, you haven't looked at
Right, I'm
entire record.
only looking at the first page. so.
And it's about 20 or plus pages long. So, assuming it's in there, and they have the record before them. But at that time, they are doing a full panel. They're looking for, they do all these labs on him. They do a CT scan and an MRI.
Are you going to be questioning about these records further? Okay, let's go ahead and take a morning break to allow Dr.
To the visit that is documented on July 22nd, but I believe it starts on July 21st of 2021. You've reviewed those records, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and at this time, if you need to step down, I'd like for you to read what the chief complaint was.
So just the first part of that initial comments?
The first
Or
and second.
up for stated complaint? So the
where it
chief
says
complaint-
initial- oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, chief complaint is listed as I complaints. That's why I wanted to.
Okay, and then what are they told that they're going to be basing their, the initial comments to the doctors?
So just the 4-year-old, without reading the whole thing, 4-year, 9-month-old boy with history of speech delay and previous failure to thrive, here for chief complaint of bruising. Patient was seen by another doctor earlier today who noted that the patient had bruising around his eyes and some other non-specific bruises on his bodies. They recommended that he come here for further evaluation.
And then, can you continue, please?
An anonymous Child Protective Services report was filed prior to arrival. Parents say that for the last 2 months, the patient has had intermittent self-harming behaviors at home. These occur when the patient becomes upset or throws a tantrum. They say that he hits his head on the ground or throws his body into things. They say that he got a black eye from hitting his face against an object while upset. Parents also say that he chews on his fingers, causing abrasions on the backs of his fingers. They say that he has never knocked himself out or had vomiting after these episodes of self-harm. Parents say that he frequently scratches at or rubs his eyes, but deny causing him any visible injury to his eyes in the recent past. Further, they say that he frequently puts objects into his ears and compulsively rubs inside of ear canals with various objects, sometimes causing injury to the ear canals. The patient is followed by an ENT. He has a referral to see a behavioral specialist in the near future. Parents deny him having any easy bleeding or easy breathing, but instead that the force of his self-harming behaviors causes injury.
And then just the last section.
Parents say that he had previously struggled to gain weight and requires nutritional shakes to gain weight appropriately. Parents also say that he had a greater increased appetite and often makes several trips to the refrigerator every night to eat what he can find. Parents say that he has.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Normal motor skills for a child his age. Parents deny any suspicion that anyone in his life has intentionally harmed him.
Okay, so you would agree with me that at the outset, the parents are disclosing information that is important for a doctor to know so that they can evaluate the child, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in this, are you aware that there was a welfare check on July 20th, 2021?
A welfare check? No.
Okay, and you haven't seen the EMS records from that?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And you're not aware that officers went out and actually interviewed Benji and Brandon at that time at their home about these injuries, are you?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I recall.
Okay, so to your recollection, you didn't see any of that evidence?
I don't recall.
You didn't see any body-worn cameras of officers talking to Benji?
I don't recall.
Now, I'm showing you what is it CTM?
That's the Center for Miracles.
Okay,
that you asked about.
so you could tell from the records that Center for Miracles was consulted.
It appears they were consulted and agreed with the workup.
And then on the disposition, what is the disposition? What is the departure plan?
For under additional instructions.
I think it just said disposition departure plan.
Right, so home self-care is the disposition, and then the departure plan is Benjamin was seen today for multiple bruises and self-harming behavior. His lab work is reassuring here, but a few tests will take several days to come back. He is safe to continue to watch at home. Please follow up with your regular doctor as soon as possible to discuss his symptoms. He may need a referral to a geneticist as well as his behavior specialist.
And can you continue with the police call?
Please call his ear, nose, throat doctor about his ear injury. He may have a ruptured eardrum. Avoid swimming or submerging his head while bathing. Showers are okay. Keep any objects out of the ear.
I just want you to finish off what they're saying.
You can use Tylenol or Motrin at home if he has pain. Child Protective Services will be in contact about his safety plan. Please notify them or see a doctor immediately if you are worried that anyone has harmed him in any way.
Okay. And so would you agree with me that nowhere in this disposition or departure plan, rather, do they inform the parents that they need to go see a nutritionalist, correct?
Not from this that we've read, correct?
They don't say, hey, you know what, let's go ahead and put him in IVs and give him fluids or make sure he can absorb nutrients, right? They don't do any kind of nutritional supplementation to show that he can absorb nutrients, correct?
We haven't read the whole file, but I don't recall them doing that, correct?
And they didn't say, hey, you know, let's journal or log what he eats every day. They don't recommend that.
Not at this point, correct.
And at any point, there's not a single doctor that sees him that says, let's journal what he's eating.
Not that I recall, correct.
And they also don't say daily weigh-ins, like, hey, like, we're worried about his weight, let's make sure we're weighing him every day. They don't tell him that, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then also, the CT scan, they had a CT scan done.
Of his head, correct.
Okay. And it came back negative.
Well, I mean, there's some findings, but it's negative for trauma.
Okay. But I mean, at this point, you have multiple doctors seeing him, and not a single doctor says, you know, hey, we need to, that there was some type of fracture to the skull or anything like that, correct?
I don't actually know if multiple doctors see him, because again, all of this is documented, as far as I can tell, by one treating physician who's maybe consulting other doctors over the phone. I can't attest to multiple doctors seeing him, although they may have. But yes, what they're doing at this point is ruling out significant trauma.
Okay. And so basically, if there is bruising, it's superficial to the outside. It's not, we don't have any, it hasn't, if there's bruising, that doesn't mean there's trauma behind the skull or anything like that, correct?
They ruled out significant internal head injuries.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And let's go back to your chart and let's talk about that same day. And I'm going to show you the show stuff from 7/21/2021, and then also the Pearl ER of 7/21/2021, right? So you testified earlier that they were the same date, and they have two very different weights, 14.6 and 13.8, correct?
Correct.
All right. And so, you know, when someone asks me about how much something weighs, I relate it to pounds, not kilograms. So this is super confusing for me. So I want to make sure that we know the difference between 1 kilogram, and 1 pound, right? So can you tell me how much 1 kilogram is in pounds?
2.2 pounds.
Okay, and so if 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds, and there's a difference on the exact same day of 14.6 minus 13.8 kilograms, how much is the difference between those?
Can you move the paper up a little?
Oh, yes, thank you.
It'll just make it easier for me.
Yeah, thank you.
I believe that is 0.8 kilograms.
Okay, 0.8. And so what would that be in pounds?
Approximately 1 pound.
Well,
I'm sorry, hang on.
here, would you like
A little less, so it's about, can we go approximately 2 pounds?
Okay,
Since it's 2.2.
it's approximately 2 pounds. I'm gonna put
Maybe a little less than 2 pounds, but we'll go approximately 2 pounds.
squiggly sign means approximate?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna do squiggly sign 2 pounds. All right, so now you would agree with me that 2 pounds on someone who weighs 200 pounds is not significant.
Correct.
But someone who is weighing 28 pounds, because if we were to do, like, for instance, 14.6 in pounds, this is for converters. Conversion. But the point is that let's say 30 pounds. An individual's 30 pounds. So 2 pounds on a 30-pound person is more significant than it would be on someone who's 200 pounds.
Correct.
Okay. And so, you know, when we have a weight that's this disparate in the same day, then we have to question which one is correct, because does someone lose 2 pounds in a day?
Not usually, but again, it might depend on what they're wearing, how they were weighed. So it might not be that the patient lost 2 pounds. It could be a variation in how they were weighed.
Fair. And so with each of these measurements that we're looking at on your chart, you would agree that we don't know back in September 29th, 2020, if he weighed 14.8 pounds, because we don't know the accuracy of that weight, correct? Because We don't know if the scale was calibrated. We don't know what he was wearing, what he was eating, if he had gone to the bathroom recently, correct?
Correct. There's some variation in each of the weights.
Okay. And so, and you did not speak with any of the doctors that actually saw Benji in the last 30 days of his life, did you?
Not except for, again, the physician who treated him on his passing.
Okay, so you spoke with the
Dr. Ian Mitchell, I believe I spoke with. I believe I seem to recall he called the day of the autopsy.
Okay, because will you verify who the treating physician is at CHOSA on August 17th, 2021?
I apologize. Just Are those records separate
No, they're at the back.
from August 17th?
They're at the back. I think it's
Oh, no, you're right. Sorry, I was looking. So, so it appears that the ER physician, it appears that the ER physician is Dr. Kumar and the consulting physician is Dr. Ian Mitchell.
Okay, so the consulting one, but the one that was actually in the ER with the child, you did not consult with.
Dr. Kumar, no.
And then you say you did speak with Mitchell?
I seem to recall I spoke with Dr. Mitchell.
Now, in your, sorry. In the packet that you provided, there's an investigative report, correct?
Correct.
That's in Defendant's Exhibit 33. In the investigative report, you list what you do on the case. Is that right?
Correct.
And in there, can you tell me whether or not you noted that you talked with Ian Mitchell?
No, it is not documented.
Okay. But let's also talk about then, did you at any point review CPS records?
I do not recall having actual CPS records, but I do not recall actually having CPS records to review, no.
Okay. So, and you would also agree with me that in your investigative report, you don't list ever having received body-worn camera footage or viewed body-worn camera footage from the 7/20/21 incident or welfare check.
Correct, that's not documented.
Now, if you indicate that the body mass index is important, it is an ability to take someone's weight and height at that moment in time and come up with the BMI, correct?
Correct. The body mass index, or BMI, is a calculation using weight and height.
And so doctors across the United States can do that at any particular point, and they are able to determine right there if they think there might be something that's flagging as problematic or that needs to be looked at further, correct?
They can calculate the BMI, yes, it can be
Okay.
useful clinically.
And in your, you did not make a chart for the height in this case,
Correct?
and you did not make a BMI chart, correct?
Not as part of the autopsy, correct?
Well, and we asked for your entire file, and there's no chart of BMI in your file.
Correct.
Now, in 2021, your office was short-staffed, correct?
Correct.
Significantly understaffed.
We were understaffed, I don't know if significantly.
Well, did you make statements to the media indicating that y'all were understaffed?
Judge, at this point, I'm going to object to the relevance.
Overruled.
You can answer, sorry.
Yes,
And in fact, you were asking for additional funding because y'all were understaffed.
we were asking for different additional positions, I believe, although the 2021 timeframe is, but yes, we were asking for positions.
Yeah, because what's going on at this time? We have COVID, right?
Correct.
And so y'all are having an increased influx of autopsies that are needing to be performed.
Our caseloads increased, yes. We had more deaths that we needed to investigate.
Okay. And that then eventually your office is put on probation because it's put on probation, correct?
So our name accreditation, so our accrediting body, which is the National Association of Medical Examiners, changes our accreditation status to provisional because of our caseloads, yes.
And when did you get put on probation?
August of 2021, I seem to recall.
Okay. And so let me ask you, in this case, in the past, you've indicated that part of what you considered was the introduction of a new care provider in Benji's life. Do you recall that?
I don't recall that being something that was considered. I believe the investigative information was considered.
And when, if you know, do you know who Miranda Casarez is?
I believe, I do not know the exact relation, but I believe she's a caregiver to
Okay.
Benjamin.
And so she's a caregiver. Do you know when she entered Benji's life?
No.
Okay. And so when we're looking at that graph that looking at this graph, but there's your graph. You're not aware of when Benji came to live with Brandon, first off, correct?
Not exactly, no.
Okay. So if the data or the information and facts are that he came to live with Brandon in January of 2019, what month would that make him? By looking at your chart, can you tell?
You said January of 2019?
Yes.
So approximately 6 months. So that would make him about 27 months approximately.
27 months. Okay. And this is, do you know the exhibit number for the chart? Because this is my copy. So,
The exhibit number for the growth chart,
yes.
the growth chart is, the spreadsheet is 110, the table graph, I'm sorry, the graph is 111.
Okay, so I'm going to show you what's, I don't think it's up there. So we will. I'm sorry. Okay. So I'm going to show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 34. You would agree that this is your chart that we were talking about earlier, correct?
So this is the chart that was
That we admitted as
correct.
content. Correct. Now, going off of that, I'm gonna use this so I can mark on it, because I can't mark on an exhibit that's already been admitted. So I'm showing you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 34, and you said what month is January 2020 and 2019?
January 2019, I believe we said. So January 18 was approximately 27 months.
Okay, and would you agree with me that 27 months would be about here? Is that fair?
That's right.
Okay. So I'm going to place a point here, and I'm going to write January 2019. Okay. Now, so if the facts in this case show that prior to January 2019, Brandon didn't have Benji. And then he gets Benji in January 2019, and he has Benji from January 2019 until he passes, right? How long is that? You said 27 months?
So that's, and he passes at 58 months, so approximately 30 months.
Okay, so he has him for 30 months. And can I write 30 months here? Just so that I'm gonna write 30 months. And this is where the chart ends, the last period, the 58. The month right here, I guess it's a little bit in from 60.
Right.
Okay. All right, and this would be August of 2021. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, so now looking at this, we break it up, and we start to look at these dots that you have put, the lighter blue, those are the data points that relate to your chart.
That relate to Benjamin. Correct.
The chart that you created.
The spreadsheet, correct.
And so you can see that in Brandon's care, he actually, at least according to the data, shows that he's doing, he's doing well. He's getting off of the 5th percentile line, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then the issue I want to point out is there's two dots on this entire thing that are off of the 5th percentile. Would you agree? There's this
That are above the 5th
Yeah.
percentile? Correct.
Okay, and so those also could be anomalies, meaning that the weights that were weighed in are skewed by either wearing a jacket, pants, as opposed to shorts. So we can't say with complete accuracy that even those data points are his curve.
It's possible.
Okay. Now, at this stage, Your Honor, just for demonstrative purposes, I'd like to ask that Defendant's Exhibit 34 be admitted.
Judge, we have to be fully admitted into the record, but if it is admitted as a demonstrative.
That's all you're asking, Ms. Sawyers, correct?
Yes.
For demonstrative? Defendant's Exhibit 34 may be marked and noted on the record as a defense demonstrative. Yes, ma'am.
you don't know let's say that it's earlier you gave an example of someone who had gotten shot, right? Your investigation as a medical examiner is not to go determine who shot the person, correct?
Correct.
And so you would agree with me that if we take your premise of starvation and we take your premise that it's intentional, then you wouldn't know who might have been depriving Benji of food, correct?
Correct.
Now, let's break that down even further. So we have the starvation. The definition of starvation is, well, can you give me your definition of starvation? Let's start with that.
So starvation would be essentially lethal malnutrition with no other cause, meaning, for instance, lethal malnutrition can happen with certain disease states. For instance, metastatic cancer, anorexia, certain forms of dementia where people aren't eating, right? These can all result in lethal malnutrition, but those we don't call those starvation because there's another reason, right? So in the case of anorexia, it would be anorexia or the cancer. Starvation is a term that's used when the lethal malnutrition has no other cause. So there's not a disease process responsible.
And you would agree with me that in the last 20 years, there's only been 2 cases through the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office that have found starvation as the cause.
Correct.
All right. And one of those, you were not the only one that you have worked on. Is this one?
The only autopsy I performed is this one.
Okay. But there is the other one, the prior one, and that was, would you agree, back from 2003?
Yes.
Okay. And did you sign off on that autopsy report?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And so at this time, I'd like to provide you, so in reviewing that report, would it help refresh your recollection as to the age and weight of that particular individual?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 35. Now,
Judge, at this point, I'm going to object to line of questioning and see relevance.
Your Honor, it's relevant because out of the 2, these are they're the same age, and it would help the jury to understand and evaluate.
I'll give you some leeway, Ms. Sawyer.
Thank you. All right, so by looking at the age of the other case, the only other case that's been declared starvation, what was the age of that individual?
So 4 years. If you want any more than that, I'll have to calculate.
4 years and 4 months?
Let me look. Approximately, yes. 4 years and 4 months.
Okay. And how much did that child weigh?
To make it consistent with the case we're discussing, I will say 7.17 kilograms.
Okay. And how much was his height?
36 inches.
And so he was, so at 7.17 kilograms, would you agree with me, is 15.8 pounds?
Approximately. If you calculated it, I'll take your word for it.
And this 4-year-old, 4-year, 4-month is 15.81 pounds, and Benji was 28 pounds, correct?
Correct.
Now, in reviewing that case, do you recall that that child was bound?
Yes.
Okay. And in reviewing that case, do you recall that that child could not physically get up and walk? Particularly had to be carried because he could not walk, stand up.
I apologize, I'm reading the investigative report. I don't have that information in this report, and I don't recall.
Okay. So, but at the time, y'all would have had access to the investigative report as well from the police?
We would have worked with the police as far as the investigation, yes.
Okay. And so, does your office still maintain photos of from autopsies? How long do they maintain them?
For perpetuity.
Okay. And so you would have access to the photo of this child at his autopsy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And have you seen the photo of that child recently?
I don't know recently, but I've seen the photo of this child.
And so you could provide that to the board or to us if you were called back, to be called back, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, yesterday, you mentioned that you were you mentioned Dr. DeMayo's? Did I pronounce
Dr. DeMayo?
DeMayo? And that y'all had that there's a textbook that he puts out, correct?
Correct.
And that you also are collaborate with him on that?
On the 3rd edition, correct.
On the 3rd edition. And if there are articles that are contained in your textbook, you would agree with me that you believe those to be experts, correct?
I believe them to contain information.
Is it information that you put out to the public that you believe is reliable and that people in your field should rely upon?
Well, I mean, it's anytime you look at an article or cite an article, there's obviously information that you're trying to convey from it, whether it be a study or a theory. So you're just conveying that information. I wouldn't necessarily say that anyone's an expert without knowing specifically the article and the person, but I mean, certainly there was information in those articles to be conveyed.
And but I mean, the point is that you've put your name on it. You've considered whether it's valuable information that should or be considered or be relied upon. Yes?
Correct.
And then in that, you say that there was a starvation chapter, correct?
I believe there's a chapter on dehydration and starvation.
Okay. Is it entitled Deaths Due to Electrolyte Abnormalities and Starvation?
Oh, yes, that is the chapter.
Okay. And in that, there are photos of what let me ask you a distinction. Someone who is emaciated versus cachectic. Is there a difference?
Not really. They're both terms used for a very thin person, like extremely thin.
Extremely thin, right? I mean, so thin, like cachectic, that's what, when you see cachectic person, that's what we would think of when we think of Nazi concentration camps with, is that fair?
Certainly, if you think of people at Nazi concentration camps, you could describe them as cachectic, yes.
Okay. And so if someone is cachectic, and I will write that word out here in a second, hopefully for you all. But if they're cachectic, then, and they're found to be, it's a sign, like, you would recognize a cachectic person if they're standing there.
It would depend. I mean, it would depend on clothing and can you fully see them? But it is a descriptive term that we use, again, to describe people who are extremely thin. So at autopsy, yes.
And so if there is a cachectic person, it doesn't mean that they've actually died of starvation. At that point, obviously, you're correct?
Correct.
Be cachectic and not die of starvation.
As the cause of death, correct.
And in someone who is cachectic, would you agree that there's also, as cited in your article, a plan that people tend to promote to help people who they believe are cachectic or maybe suffering from starvation to reintroduce food back into their system? Are you familiar with that?
You're talking about how to treat cachexia and starvation?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, and malnourishment?
Correct.
Extreme malnourishment. Now, to be fair, there's degrees of malnourishment, yes?
Correct.
And so, I mean, the fact that I don't eat for a day or two does not mean I'm going to die of malnourishment.
Correct.
So, but when we see extreme malnourishment, that's cachectic, that's extreme, right?
Correct.
And when we see cachectic malnourishment, then at that point, there are complications in reintroducing food to that person's system, is there not?
If the cachexia is caused by starvation, meaning not eating, then yes.
Okay. And so, why is that? We can't just, if someone hasn't eaten, let's say, in a week, or I don't know, more, how long does it take to get to cachexia?
That would depend on the individual.
So, if they haven't eaten though, and they're on the verge of death by starvation, introducing food into the system could shut their body down, correct?
Sometimes, yes.
And so there's actually a plan in place so that food can be introduced more slowly.
Correct.
So it doesn't overwhelm the body.
Correct.
And in this fact pattern, would you agree with me that there was no indication that there was an absolute withholding of food for a number of days?
So from the investigation, it does not appear it's an absolute withholding of food.
Okay. And so this is not the same as someone who is locked in a room and left without food or water, right?
Correct.
This is one of those that when we talk about starvation, would you agree with me that you also have to make the distinction between whether it's intentional or unintentional? So
that goes to manner of death, not cause, and starvation being cause.
Right, and I'm not assuming, for the sake of argument, your theory that it's starvation. Now, we have to then consider whether it's intentional or unintentional.
Correct, to get to manner.
To get to manner. And that means whether or not it was homicide, or if it was unintentional, what would it be?
It would depend on it would depend on why the starvation happened. An unintentional deprivation of food, again, it would depend on those circumstances.
Okay, but I mean, it wouldn't be undetermined if you were like, hey, we know that the person didn't consume food. For instance, if they are choosing not to consume food, that would be their decision not to consume food, like for anorexia, right?
So, correct, and an adult who can make that decision and dies from, say, anorexia, those deaths are considered natural.
Okay, so that would have been a natural death. But it wouldn't have been an undetermined death, correct? Because you would have...
Again, it depends on the circumstances. So each case is individual. So undetermined would mean we just didn't have enough information to determine why the starvation occurred.
All right, and so in this case, though, when we're talking about intentional versus unintentional, would you agree, like we've seen evidence that there's multiple doctors that see Benji, correct?
Correct.
And that not on one of those trips to the doctor, do any of those records indicate that the parents were educated on potential vitamin deficiencies?
Correct.
And because you're pointing to vitamin deficiency earlier, correct?
I just said that macrocytosis can be a sign of vitamin deficiency.
You're not saying that this child was vitamin deficient, though?
No, I'm just saying that that can be a sign of vitamin deficiency.
Okay. So then let me back up. When the body does not have food, which is energy, right? Then would you agree with me, it first burns fat, and then it burns protein, and then what does it burn?
Then unfortunately it starts to consume whatever it can for energy and conserve as much as it can.
All right. And so in this case, would you agree with me that you do not know if the food, like what the food pattern was the week prior to his passing?
No, I do not.
And so there's doctors that are seeing the child, and can you tell at this point, I mean, let me back up. Let me go to the version. Would you agree that death due to starvation from any cause is rare in this country?
Yes.
And would you describe...
I apologize. Death due to starvation. So again, starvation being lethal malnutrition with no other cause is rare, because deaths due to lethal malnutrition due to another cause, say anorexia, are called anorexia. So deaths due to starvation are rare in this country.
Okay, and do children dying of starvation still have visible and measurable subcutaneous fat?
Okay. Sometimes.
So, do you remember when I asked you the question, it burns fat, then protein, and then you're basically like, well, the next thing is your body stops working, correct?
If you get to, I said it'll burn whatever it can, but yes.
Okay. What else is there besides fat and protein?
Basically any tissues. I mean, but again, there's other things going on with starvation cases besides just energy levels. right? We're breaking this down to it's either fat or protein, but we're also talking about when we're eating, we're not getting the nutrients that we need, the vitamins, the minerals that are required for certain proteins and functions to exist in our body. And so again, it's a very complex physiology that's going on with starvation and with what your body's choosing to burn, whether it be the fats or the proteins. In general, we turn to fat first because that's what it's there. It's an energy store. And when we run out of that fat, the extra fat, right, that we have, in which case, for instance, mesenteric fat is not extra fat, that is necessary fat, then we turn to protein. And then we start turning back to, say, the fats that are no longer, they're not extra, but we need that energy. So the mesenteric fat, the subcutaneous fat. So it's a complicated process that I can't just shoehorn into, first this happens and then this happens.
But, I mean, in regards to having fat stores on a body, face, along the skin, that's the subcutaneous, right?
Correct.
So it's the fat that's right underneath the surface.
Correct.
And what you're saying is that someone, in your opinion, someone who can die of starvation may still have subcutaneous fat.
Correct, because it depends on, for one, it depends on how much subcutaneous fat you started with, right? Some of us might have more than others, and so we have more extra fat. But that subcutaneous fat also serves a purpose. It's our insulation. So the body doesn't want to burn all of it, right? It wants to only burn that which is extra. Then it'll turn to proteins. Then it might turn back to that fat that's no longer extra, right? The reason of having some subcutaneous fat is subcutaneous tissue isn't just fat. There's fibrous tissue in there, there's vessels in there, there's some fat in there. So you're still going to have some subcutaneous tissue, even if most of your fat has been burned off.
You testified previously that a child whose height is at the 5th percentile and weight is at the 5th percentile wouldn't necessarily be skinny, but would be normal. Correct?
Well, they'd have a normal BMI.
Okay. And they would be appropriate for those measurements. They would be appropriate because the weight and the height kind of correlate.
Correct.
And are you familiar with any of the various classification systems for evaluating the severity of malnutrition?
Clinically, no.
Okay, so you're not aware of the Gomez, Waterloo, or Welcome?
So, okay. I'm aware of them. Do I use them? Do I utilize them? Can I tell you about them? No. But I do know that clinical systems exist. I'm also aware of the WHO Z-score classification for us analyzing BMI.
Okay, and you did not use that in this case, did you?
No.
And what articles did you refer to in reviewing this case, preparing this case?
In reviewing this case, I've read numerous articles in my training and experience on starvation, as well as my editorial duties with the journal. I did not turn to anything in specifically. I relied on my education and experience.
Now, your education, had you ever dealt, I mean, you did not write the article that in the chapter 4, you did not write that, did you? Chapter 4 in your textbook?
What article in chapter?
It's your chapter 4.
So did I write but you said the article in chapter 4.
Well, it is chapter 4, I apologize.
So did I write chapter 4? Dr. DeMaio and I wrote the book together. What I wrote and what he wrote, I don't know. We worked together and collaborated.
So you can't tell me if you even wrote the portion on starvation, correct?
I don't recall. Correct.
Okay. Now, if that article says that you should be relying on the water load, then then basically you're saying that either you or Dr. DeMaio are in agreement that that should be something that should be considered in starvation cases, correct?
I don't believe it says we should be relying upon it. I believe we referenced that there are clinical measurements out there that you can use.
But you didn't apply any of these to Benji.
Not those particular ones, no.
Well, which particular ones did you apply?
The CDC.
And on your CDC, did that focus on his weight for height or his weight for age?
So the CDC looked at the BMI being less than the first percentile.
My question is, what did you use the data for weight for height or based off age?
So I use the data for BMI, which incorporates weight and height.
And yesterday you said that it focused on 4-year-olds, correct?
By age, correct.
4 year and 10 months to be exact.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you spoke in your testimony yesterday about stunting.
Correct.
Yeah. Was Benji stunted?
Again, it appears he did not grow from about, I believe it's about 48 months to his death at 58 months. So for about 10 months, it appears he did not grow.
But you don't have those heights charted in front of you, correct?
Correct.
So at this stage, you couldn't provide us with the data that underlies that.
I believe it's contained in all of the medical records you have there.
Did he have classifiable malnutrition under any of the various systems? So, like, in your autopsy, did any of the various systems that you looked at, did you see signs of malnutrition?
I don't believe I understand the question.
Or any of the organs, weights? Because you don't know those. You know the weights, but they all seem to be within the standard weight.
So they're all on the low side of the range. So it depends on if you use, say, a mean weight, in which case they're all less than the mean for age. If we use a range, which is essentially a 95% confidence interval, they are all on the low side within that range.
Under Gomez, which compares, that's a type of classification, which compares the child's weight for age, would you agree that Benji would be classified as moderately malnourished?
I believe, does Gomez use the WHO Z-scores of -1, -2, -3?
I'll have to come back to you on that. Thank you. Since you didn't do any of them, you're not going to know where he fell out, correct?
Those are clinical measurements and used clinically by physicians, so yes, this was an autopsy examination.
Now, can a malnourished child die from other causes?
Yes.
Okay, and did you find evidence of another cause of death?
No.
And are there other causes of death that show no abnormalities at autopsy?
Yes.
And what are those?
The main one is suffocation.
And what about cardiac arrhythmias?
And cardiac arrhythmias.
Seizures?
Seizures when there's a seizure disorder, so there's a history to go along with that, but we wouldn't see a terminal seizure, no.
Well, and to be fair though, there's always a first when you start to have seizures, correct?
Correct. I am unaware of a single report of the first seizure in a seizure disorder being a lethal one.
And now, did Benji die of asphyxia?
So again, asphyxia would include, asphyxia is lack of oxygen to the brain by an external cause. So this could be choking, it could be strangulation. So there are certain types of asphyxia we could rule out. It's not choking, it's not strangulation. However, it also includes smothering, which is what we just discussed, that I could not exclude.
Well, and you say choking in the sense of if something got caught in his airway that restricted him from being able to breathe, that you wouldn't, and the item is then removed somehow through coughing or whatever, through CPR, that would not be something that you could rule out at death. At the autopsy.
So in order for an obstruction to result in death, it has to obstruct the airway and it has to be removed not by coughing. So it has to be removed from an external source. If it's by coughing, then that's not going to result in death. Usually that external source is EMS or medical treatment, who, when they go to put the breathing tube in, remove the item, in which case, no, if the item's removed, we can no longer see it, but we have the reports from the medical personnel who removed it.
And so the point being is that if there is something that could have been lodged in his mouth that would have prevented oxygen, and it's removed, you would not be able to tell.
If it's removed, correct.
And so you cannot rule out suffocation in this case,
Correct.
either intentional or unintentional.
Correct.
And did Benji die of cardiac arrhythmia disturbance?
I do not know.
Did he die of lethal arrhythmia?
I do not know. These are mechanisms of death.
The same mechanism, starvation's a mechanism as well?
Starvation is a cause.
It's a cause.
And starvation can lead to lethal arrhythmias or abnormal heartbeats. In fact, the main way that starvation kills you is usually by a lethal dysrhythmia or an abnormal heartbeat when starvation deaths die suddenly. So it's certainly possible it was an arrhythmia, but I can't diagnose that at autopsy.
Or even if it didn't have anything to do with starvation, you also cannot, in a child that isn't even considered for starvation, arrhythmia also could not be determined at autopsy, correct?
Correct. We cannot find abnormal heartbeats at autopsy.
And did you evaluate Benji for possible genetic, or did you do genetic testing on him to rule out arrhythmias?
No.
So, given the fact that you cannot rule out suffocation at this point, cannot rule out arrhythmia, would you agree that it's possible that Benji is just a small kid that has small parents, and that he actually died from something else?
So a small child who has small parents would be, again, say 5th percentile for height and weight, normal BMI. So this is a very low BMI. So this is a malnourished child. So I can't simply say it's a small kid from small parents. Could there have been an arrhythmia? Could there have been a suffocation? I have no evidence of that, but I don't have an ability to disprove it, no.
Well, have you had a chance to review Dr. Lucifer's pediatrics, publication in the pediatrics, official journal of American Academy of Pediatrics?
That was the Lucifer and Kellogg article on starvation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so, I'm gonna show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 35. Oh, sorry, 36. Is that his article? And Dr. Kellogg's?
Yes.
And looking at that, it contains a photo of a child that has passed away from starvation, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you agree that that's what it looks like when a child passes away from starvation?
This is a child who passed away from starvation.
Thank you. Oh, and I apologize. Let me just make sure. What photo can you tell what figure? They're identified by figure numbers.
Figure 2 is the one I was looking at.
Thank you. You did the autopsy on August 18th of 2021, correct?
Correct.
And when you did the autopsy, you file a death certificate that doesn't list a cause of death at that time.
Correct.
And you don't actually determine a cause of death until February 8th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
And before you determine a cause of death, you meet with Detective Size.
Correct.
Now, yesterday you focused on whether or not, explain to the jury that there were investigators in your office that you could deploy that are independent of the prosecutor's office, independent of law enforcement, correct?
Correct.
You would agree with me that in this instance, after your autopsy, you did not deploy any of your investigators to this case?
So our investigators, their job is to gather information from other agencies. So in gathering the video evidence, the videos, and gathering the medical records, that's our investigators. We have no legal rights to do anything else. So our investigators can't go get videos, and we have to rely on other agencies to supply that to us. Our investigators' job is to go find out who has it and get it for us.
Okay, and so in your investigators in this case didn't get the CPS records, correct?
Correct.
And they didn't get the whole, there's this cell by report that has videos that were pulled down from Miranda's phone. They didn't get that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. The cell-by report?
There is an extraction of Miranda Casarez's cell phone that they obtained, that the law enforcement obtains.
So correct, we don't get this information. We go to law enforcement, ask them what information they have, and ask them to give it to us. We can't get these reports on our own.
I understand, but you were not provided with the extraction report that contained data from Miranda's phone, correct?
Does that data include the photographs and the videos?
So, yeah, I'm getting there. So you did not have the entire report. You got to see only what Detective Size cherry-picked out of that report for you, correct?
So I don't know about the report, so I apologize. I can't speak to the report. But Detective Size said he had video and photographs. He came to our office. He had many videos and photographs on a drive, and we sat there and watched, or I sat there and watched and looked at all of them. They were not. We watched all of them. So I don't know if that's all of them, but there were many of them.
And the point being, though, is that he was able to select which ones that you saw, and therefore you were not just given a blank slate of, hey, this is the whole evidence. He comes to you with what he wants to show you, his digital timeline, correct?
My understanding from Detective Size is that he brought all of the videos and photographs that he had. He indicated to me as such, this is everything we have, and I look at it. I do not have a way to substantiate that. That is true.
Okay. And so if there were videos and photos of Benji sitting around the table eating with all of his family and food that was being prepared at the home, you would agree with me that he didn't show you a single one of those photos?
I don't recall.
So you also did not receive the recordings of Benji himself saying that he had been eating and had food. You didn't receive those, did you?
I don't know what videos that are, so I don't recall.
Okay.
I don't recall seeing videos.
All right. So if there's recordings of him meeting with CPS, and he's telling them what he eats, and he's telling them that he has food, and he's telling him that he's self-inflicting his injuries, you didn't see any of that, did you?
I don't recall seeing any of that.
Now, there's something in your report, to be clear, in your autopsy, where you talk about the injuries, the bruising that you see on his body. Correct?
Correct. The bruises are documented in the report.
And so those bruising, the term blunt force injury, can you explain that to the jury, what that means?
So, to a forensic pathologist, we essentially have roughly 3 types of injuries. We have ballistic injuries, which are associated with firearms. We have sharp force injuries, think about stab wounds and cutting wounds. And we have blunt force injuries, which are essentially everything else, right? So if I hit my arm on this table and I get a bruise, it's a blunt force injury. So bruises, which we call contusions, and scratches, which we call abrasions, are termed blunt force injuries, meaning it's not a sharp force that made it, it's not a cut, it's a blunt object or a blunt incident, say in a car collision or falling on the floor or hitting the table. Those are all blunt force injuries.
Okay, and so to be clear, blunt force doesn't mean that somebody else hit you with something. It just means that your body came into contact with something that caused that contusion.
It came into with a blunt force, correct. So we're not saying anything about infliction or how it occurred. It's a blunt force. It's not sharp. It's not a firearm. It's a blunt force.
And you would agree with me that you did not find any of those blunt force injuries to be the cause of why Benjamin passed away?
Correct.
Correct. And you did not really focus on that, finding out whether or not those blunt force injuries were consistent or inconsistent, because, let me back up. You didn't go do any kind of investigation as to what caused those injuries? The blunt force injuries?
So yes, as part of our investigation, again, we looked at the medical records, we have the circumstances, we follow up to police. So what we're trying to do is find a reason for all of the findings present at autopsy, including the blunt force injuries.
Yeah, but in this instance, you didn't review the very reports that you would need to in order to determine whether or not those blunt force injuries were consistent with, I think you said you make this a conclusion at the end of your report or that they're not consistent. Your statement is several blunt force injuries were present on the body without adequate explanation as to their cause, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But you never even viewed the evidence, the CPS records, the July 2021 statements from the child to determine what was causing these, correct?
So
Well, the answer, and let me be very clear what I'm asking. You did not review that data. The data that I'm talking about is from July 20th, 2021 and the CPS report, correct?
I did not review the CPS report, but I had several meetings with the CPS investigators in which that information was conveyed to me. I did not know of this data about the interview with the child on July 21st.
What date did you meet with the CPS investigators?
I do not have that with me.
And you would agree with me that in your investigative report, you note when you speak with Detective Size, correct?
Correct.
And who specifically did you speak with from the CPS department?
I do not actually recall. These were done in what are called multidisciplinary team meetings that are coordinated through Child Safe, who brings the investigative team together to discuss the investigation.
And so, are you aware that Benji was actually asked questions about how he gets his injuries?
I don't recall, no.
Now, the point being is that despite you having testified regarding Benji previously to this is the first time that you're claiming that you met with CPS.
I don't believe I was asked.
And in regards to figuring out where the injuries come from, would you agree that the bruising or the contusions, as you call them, that there was CPR done on the child prior to coming in, correct?
Correct.
And sometimes when you're trying to save a child's life, you're not going to stop and realize you might be bruising the child, correct?
Correct.
And you're not able to eliminate or identify which bruising might have been caused from CPR and trying to save his life versus existing prior to CPR.
So CPR bruises are usually in a particular area and of a particular type. And so when we see those bruises, which we often see, we will differentiate those and pull them out as CPR bruises. So the bruises described as injuries are not consistent with CPR.
Well, was the child pulled out of a hot car and laid on the asphalt in August to give CPR by the mother or by the stepmom?
So again, the bruises that are outlined in the autopsy report as injuries are not consistent with CPR. The hot asphalt would have caused burning, not bruises.
Okay, but when you're placing a child on the ground, in any event, with someone who doesn't know what CPR, how to do it, is trying to figure it out, is it possible that those bruises, some of the bruises, could have been caused from that?
It's possible.
let's, you didn't note in your report, anywhere in your report, what you suppose, if you talk to CPS, what you learned from CPS, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't note what you learned from Detective Size, correct?
Correct.
And in looking at your report, those that if you did talk to CPS and if you did talk to Detective Size, those and the medical reports are all you had to review.
As well as the autopsy information, yes.
And I apologize. I just meant in regarding investigative side of it, not your autopsy.
As information supplied to us, that is all I recall, yes.
Did you receive a copy of Detective Size's police report?
I don't recall.
And if you had received it, it would be part of your packet?
No,
It wouldn't?
no.
Would you have noted it in here?
If our investigators received it, they would have notated it.
But if the detective hands it to you, it doesn't get notated?
Not necessarily, no.
At this time, Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Can I see the parties, please? Break early today, but I want to check with the parties on the logistics. So we'll see you in about 5 minutes.
All right, the jury.
Go with my thanks. Please have a good afternoon and have a safe evening, and we will see you tomorrow at 9:15. Thank you very much.
All right, the jury.